They say you can hear a lie, but truth makes a sound you'll never forget. For me, it was the sound of a knife slicing the air, then thudding into the wooden cabinet just an inch from my neck. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'm 72 years old. I've lived in this house for 46 years. I raised my son Nathan here, buried my husband in the backyard rose garden he planted, and grew older in the arms of its silence. But now, silence is my prison. Because ever since Nathan remarried, this home no longer feels like mine. Not since she moved in. Her name is Serena. A name that sounds like peace, but there's nothing peaceful about that woman. She walked into our lives with a red smile and cold eyes, charmed Nathan, fooled everyone, and claimed every corner of this house like she was marking territory. At first, she was sugar with me. "Oh, Eleanor, you've kept such a lovely home. You must teach me your pot roast recipe. I could never live up to the way you raised Nathan." But that was just bait. Within weeks, she had rearranged the kitchen, moved my plates, dumped my spices, threw out the cast iron skillet that had been my mother's. She cooked her own food, locked the pantry sometimes when I wasn't allowed to mess things up, and when Nathan wasn't around, she'd mutter insults sharp enough to cut skin. Clumsy old witch. No wonder he never talks about you much. You should be grateful we even let you stay. Let me stay in my own home? And then came the hot oil. I was standing at the stove, stirring soup. She came in smiling, carrying a pan of bacon, and accidentally turned, splashing hot grease across my wrist. I screamed. She shrugged. "Oh no, Eleanor, you should be more careful in your condition." The cut on my shin the next week was from the broken mug she left near the sink. Said I was being dramatic. My fingers got burned when she forgot to mention the oven was still on. And every time Nathan came home, she'd have tears in her eyes. "Your mom's slipping, love. She forgot to turn off the stove again." I'm really worried. But that day in the kitchen? That was the first time she stopped pretending. It was a chilly Monday morning. I was cutting carrots, my hands trembling from the pain in my wrist, when she stormed in, furious that I'd left a dish towel on the counter. "Do you think you're in some nursing home?" she snapped. "You live here by charity. You don't own anything anymore, not even the right to speak." I finally snapped back. I turned to her and said, "This was my house before you ever slithered into our lives, and I will not be spoken to like I'm a piece of dust on your designer heels." She froze. Her lips curled. And in a flash, faster than I could move, she grabbed the kitchen knife next to the sink and hurled it at me. It missed. Barely. Thunk. The sound lodged itself into the cabinet and my bones. Her face turned ghostly pale for a second, but then she smiled. A slow, twisted smile. "Oops," she said, like a schoolgirl who dropped her pen. "You shouldn't provoke people when your memory's already slipping." That night, as I lay in bed listening to the creaks of the old house and the faint murmur of their laughter from downstairs, I realized something. I wasn't going crazy, but I was going to make her think I was. Because I remembered something Serena forgot. This house has secrets. And I know every one of them. Especially the one in the attic, where my late husband, God rest him, installed a home security system he never fully removed. The cameras. The wiring. The backup hard drive in the floorboards. I smiled that night for the first time in months. Because I knew this house remembers everything. And it was time the truth made its sound. If you were Eleanor, would you stay silent or fight back? What would you do if someone used your own home against you? Comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true-to-life tales that hit hard and cut deep. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the knife again. Flying. Spinning. A silver blur of hate and warning. And Serena's smile, that little smirk she wore after trying to kill me. Because that's what it was. Let's not dress it up. She didn't throw that knife as a joke. She threw it to silence me. And it almost worked. But something inside me snapped back into place, something older than fear. Something deeper than rage. I wasn't just an old woman with wrinkled hands and fading memories. I was a mother. A wife. The one who held this home together through funerals, storms, and Nathan's worst nights as a teenager. This place was mine. The walls knew it. And I realized I had one ally Serena couldn't sweet talk or control: the house itself. At sunrise, I climbed the attic stairs like a ghost, quiet, determined. The floorboards creaked like they were greeting an old friend. Dust hung in the air like secrets. And in the far left corner, behind faded boxes of Christmas lights and my husband's old fishing gear, was the panel. The one no one else knew about. Back in 1998, Harold had the idea to wire up hidden security cameras not for thieves, but for peace of mind, he'd said. You never know, Ellie. It's better if the house sees everything. I remember laughing at the time. Now it felt like he'd prepared me for a war I didn't know I'd fight. The wires were still there, tucked neatly behind the beams. The small lens above the kitchen shelf still blinked faintly red when I tested it. I connected the hard drive to the backup battery Harold had stashed in a sealed tin. When the screen came to life, showing a grainy black and white feed of my kitchen, I almost cried. The house remembered. And now it would help me remember everything Serena wanted buried. That afternoon, I stayed quiet. Played dumb. I let Serena take the remote from my hand and snap at me for putting it on the wrong channel. I smiled when she dumped the soup I'd made into the trash in front of Nathan and told him it tasted off. I didn't flinch when she muttered, "Try not to set the house on fire, Grandma." I even nodded and apologized. Because now every word, every shove, every thrown dish was being recorded. But something shifted. Serena noticed my silence. She started watching me closer, like she sensed the shift in energy. Abusers always know when their victim is changing. They can smell resistance the way wolves smell blood. One evening, she stood in the doorway of my room and stared at me while I was folding towels. Not saying a word. Just watching. Then she smiled. "You look different, Eleanor. Not scared anymore. Makes me wonder if you're up to something stupid." I didn't look up. I just said, "Maybe I'm just tired of being scared." And for the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Was it fear? Or just awareness? The next day, I found her going through my drawers. When I confronted her, she shrugged. "Just making sure you're not hiding your medications again. Nathan worries when your mind starts slipping." The tactic shifted. She wasn't just gaslighting now, she was laying the groundwork. If she couldn't silence me, she'd make sure no one believed me. But the cameras were rolling, and the truth was building. Every day brought more evidence, her grabbing my wrist and twisting it during a photo session while saying, "Smile, or I'll give you something to cry about." Her blaming me for a broken vase she shattered. Her pouring salt into the tea I made for guests, then acting horrified when they tasted it. Her telling Nathan I was forgetting people's names, losing time. Every moment captured. I backed it all up on a second drive and locked that one in a metal box buried in the rose garden under a new bush. A backup. Just in case. And then came the invite. Serena loved appearances. She arranged a grand Thanksgiving dinner, her first time hosting the entire family. She announced on Facebook with a dozen filtered photos of pumpkin pie and place settings. Her parents, Nathan's cousins, even some of our old neighbors were coming. She didn't invite me to help. But I had a plan. And it began with a single call to a friend, Detective Maureen Hall. Retired. Old friend of my late husband. "Come to dinner," I told her. "Wear civilian clothes. Just watch. And bring a flash drive," I added silently. Serena strutted around that whole week like a queen. Barking orders. Telling Nathan she was doing all the work. Smiling through clenched teeth when I passed by. "Try not to embarrass us this year, Eleanor." "Oh, I won't," I replied. "I think this year will be unforgettable." Because I knew the knife had missed me. But the truth? The truth never misses. The morning of Thanksgiving felt like standing in the eye of a storm. Calm, still, but everything around it on the edge of unraveling. Serena was up before dawn, barking at the caterers like she owned the house and the entire food industry. She wore a gold silk blouse and a diamond necklace Nathan had gifted her the year before. My necklace, actually. It had been mine. A gift from Harold on our 40th anniversary. I found it missing from my jewelry box 6 months ago. I'd never said a word. Today I would. Guests started arriving around noon. Her parents walked in first, all fake warmth and frozen smiles. Serena greeted them with cheek kisses, then immediately whispered, "Don't mind Eleanor, she's been struggling lately. Just nod along if she says strange things." She wanted them to think I was unraveling. Good. Let them think I was weak. Quiet. Fading. That made what came next all the more powerful. By 3 p.m., the house was full of chatter, wine, and golden light spilling through the tall windows. The fireplace roared and laughter echoed through the living room. Serena floated from guest to guest like the hostess of a magazine spread. I did the entire menu myself, she beamed. Eleanor helped a little, bless her. Detective Maureen arrived in a navy sweater and jeans. No badge. No clipboard. Just an old friend, blending in, sipping cider quietly in the corner, watching. The dining table was beautifully set. 20 seats. Linen napkins. Wine glasses. Name cards. My place was down at the end. The farthest seat, next to the kitchen door. Serena looked at me and said, "That way you're close in case we need anything reheated." I smiled. Of course. I didn't care where I sat, because I knew what was going to happen after dessert. Dinner passed with surface-level conversation. Serena controlled every topic like a puppeteer. When someone asked where Harold's old war medals had gone, she replied, "Oh, we've packed most of the old clutter away." Too many memories for Eleanor, you know. Clutter. She called my life clutter. But I waited. Waited as the turkey was carved. As the cranberry sauce passed hands. As guests complimented the stuffing I had actually made, and Serena took the credit. And when the pumpkin pie was served and the wine was poured, I stood up. "Excuse me," I said gently. "I'd like to say a few words." Serena's eyes locked on mine. "Eleanor, maybe another time." Nathan looked up. "Let her speak." I nodded at Maureen. She pulled something from her bag. A small projector. She connected it to the TV in the living room while I walked to the center of the room. "Serena has worked very hard this year," I began. "She's charmed us all. Cooked, decorated, smiled through it all. But you see, I've been quiet too long. And this house has been watching. Just like all of you are now." The screen flickered. The first video played. Serena throwing the hot oil. Serena smashing the mug and stepping back while I bled. Serena twisting my wrist and whispering, "Try that again and see what happens." Gasps. Someone dropped a glass. More footage. More words. More cruelty. Serena's voice, clear as day, "One day, she's going to fall down those stairs. And I'll say it was an accident." Then, the knife. The silver blur. The scream. The thud. On camera. Dead silence in the room. Serena looked like she'd turned to stone. Nathan's fork clattered onto his plate. He stared at the screen. Then at her. "Tell me that wasn't real," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Those are deepfakes." Serena cried, leaping up. "She's insane." "You said it yourself, Nathan, she's not well." "I said she was forgetful," he snapped. "Not a damn movie director." She ran to the TV. Tried to yank the plug. Maureen stepped forward and pulled her hand back. "Don't touch it." "I don't know what this old witch is doing," Serena shouted, voice shaking now. "She's manipulating everyone enough," Nathan said. His voice was hollow. I turned to look at him. My son. My child. The boy I carried. Raised. Loved. I saw his face crack in a way that broke me more than any knife could. "She's been hurting you?" he asked. "All this time." I didn't answer. The videos did. And that was the moment Serena broke. "I didn't mean to," she began, then stopped. Realized she'd said too much. I mean, none of this is what it looks like, but she was surrounded by silence now. No one came to her defense. Not even her own parents. They just stared at her like they didn't know her at all. And as I stood in that room, in my house, with my truth finally laid bare, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Like something had been scraped off my soul after years of silence. Nathan walked to me slowly. He didn't say a word, just took my hand in his, and I saw tears well in his eyes. Then he turned to Serena and said 5 words I'll never forget. "You don't live here anymore." Serena didn't leave quietly. She screamed. sobbed, cursed, threw a wine glass at the wall when Nathan told her to pack her things. You're choosing her over your wife? Your own mother who doesn't even remember what day it is. Nathan didn't flinch. No, he said coldly. I'm choosing the truth. Serena's parents tried to intervene, but there was no ground left to stand on. The footage had spoken louder than any defense she could muster. And when Maureen quietly slipped a USB into Nathan's hand, one containing copies of the recordings, Serena finally saw it. This wasn't just a public humiliation. It was evidence. I'll sue her, she hissed. You'll see. She manipulated you, twisted everything. She's the snake. No, I said, stepping forward, voice calm. I was the garden. You were the venom. That was the last thing I said to her. Within the hour, she was gone. Nathan stood in the doorway, staring at her car as it disappeared down the street, headlights bouncing against the darkened windows. He looked like a man who'd just been pulled from a deep lake, wet with truth, shivering from realization. The guests had left long ago, offering hushed condolences and shamefaced glances. No one knew what to say. The perfect Thanksgiving had turned into a courtroom. But to me, it was finally justice. The silence that followed was strange. The house no longer felt like it was holding its breath. The walls didn't creak in nervousness anymore. It felt lighter, like something dark had been exorcised. Nathan stayed. He didn't speak much that night. He sat beside me on the couch, staring at the flickering fireplace, and whispered once, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I put my hand on his. I know you didn't. But now you do. He slept on the couch that night. And for the first time in years, I locked my bedroom door not out of fear, but habit. The next day brought headlines. Maureen had quietly passed the footage to a contact in the DA's office. Not to press charges, not yet, but to make sure there was a file. Just in case Serena tried anything stupid. When she found out, she sent one last text to Nathan. You'll regret humiliating me like this. Watch your back. He blocked her. But I printed it and slipped it into the box with the footage. Labeled it, in case of resurrection. Because people like Serena don't vanish. They wait. Lurk. Plot. But now I was ready. Over the next few weeks, Nathan helped me undo everything she'd done. He found the necklace in her drawer and returned it. Took down the photos she'd hung, those posed, fake images of her smiling over dishes I'd cooked. He helped me scrub the kitchen, rewired the pantry lock, and even repainted the cabinets she'd carved her initials into. Little things. Quiet restorations. It felt like the house was healing with me. But healing isn't linear. One morning, I woke up to a loud bang downstairs. I froze. The old terror returned in a single breath. I grabbed my cane and moved slowly, heart racing, only to find Nathan had dropped a pan while trying to make eggs. He looked sheepish. Sorry, he said. I was trying to make breakfast. And I burst into tears. Because I hadn't known how tightly I'd been wound, how trauma clings to routine, how even love can echo like violence when your soul's still flinching. Nathan didn't ask questions. He just held me. We'll unlearn it together, Mom, he whispered. But I wasn't done yet. Because this story wasn't just mine. It belonged to every woman who's ever been silenced in her own home. So I made a decision. I wrote it down. Every incident. Every insult. Every bruised wrist and burned finger. Every word she ever threw like a dart. I wrote it all, then shared it with a local women's shelter. They asked if I would speak. I did. And when I told them about the knife that wasn't for cooking, about the oil, about the footage, about Thanksgiving, they listened. Some cried. One woman came up after and said, I didn't know we were allowed to fight back at that age. I smiled and said, we are. Sometimes it just takes a little longer to load the ammo. That Christmas, the house was full of light again. Real light. Honest. Nathan cooked. He burned the turkey. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on the stuffing. We watched movies late into the night. There were no locked pantries, no whispered threats, no gaslit apologies. Just us. And peace. Finally. It took me days to walk past that cabinet without flinching. The one where the knife landed. Nathan offered to patch the wood, paint over it. But I stopped him. No, I said. Leave it. There was something sacred about that gash in the cabinet. A reminder, maybe. That pain leaves marks, but so does survival. That thin, violent scar in the wood was the moment I stopped being a victim and started being a witness. It wasn't just damage. It was a date carved in truth. The knives once hung on a magnetic strip above that cabinet. Serena had insisted. Looks modern, she said. Gives easy access. Yes, it did. Too easy. So after she left, I took them all down. One by one. I wrapped each blade in old dish towels and placed them in a box, sealed it, and stored it in the attic under Harold's fishing gear. I didn't throw them away. I just didn't want them near me anymore. And instead, I bought a soft-handled set of kitchen tools. Bright colors. Silicone edges. They made the kitchen feel more like a place of cooking again, not combat. Nathan changed too. He started asking questions he never dared ask before. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Did she hurt you this bad the whole time? Did Dad ever treat you like that? Hard questions. Ugly ones. But I answered every one. Because silence is a disease, and I was tired of being sick from it. Yes, I was scared you wouldn't believe me. Yes, it was this bad. Worse. And no, your father was loud and impatient, but he never made me feel invisible. Serena did that every day. He cried once. In the laundry room. Said he felt like a fool. That he chose a woman who'd slowly destroyed the only other woman who had ever loved him unconditionally. I held his face in my hands and said something I hadn't said out loud in years. She didn't destroy me. She tried. But I'm still here. That weekend, Nathan surprised me. He called the family over. Not for a party, not for a holiday. Just for truth. We all sat in the living room, his cousins, my niece Deborah, even Serena's old college friend Sasha, who'd come by to return some dishes. And he stood in front of everyone and said, I let someone hurt my mother for too long. I saw the signs and ignored them. I listened to lies instead of her voice. That ends now. He passed around printed copies of my written statement. The story. My story. He handed out flash drives with the camera footage. He told them what happened on Thanksgiving. And then he said something that made my ribs vibrate with emotion. I'm taking legal action. Against Serena. She forged financial documents under my name, tried to take out a reverse mortgage on this house without my consent, and opened a credit card in my mother's name. The room went cold. He looked right at me and added, I'm not doing it for revenge. I'm doing it because Mom never asked for justice. And she deserves it. I hadn't known about the reverse mortgage. Not until then. I felt sick. Violated all over again. But beneath that, I felt something deeper. Seen. Finally, I wasn't just a burden in a corner. I wasn't forgetful Eleanor anymore. I was someone whose truth mattered. Days turned into weeks. The legal case began quietly. Serena hadn't responded to the attorney's letters, but I knew her silence didn't mean surrender. She was too vain to go down without claw marks. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, the doorbell rang. Nathan answered. I watched from the kitchen. It was her. Serena. Standing on my porch in sunglasses, red lipstick, and trembling hands. Like she had rehearsed her performance in front of a mirror for days. I need to speak to Eleanor, she said. Alone. Nathan didn't move. You can speak from there. I want to apologize. Now I walked forward. Slowly. Cane in hand. Every step a message. I opened the storm door but did not invite her in. She lowered her glasses. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean for it to get that bad. I was under pressure. Your son, he always made me feel like I was never enough, and I took it out on you. You threw a knife at me, I said. Her mouth twitched. You poured hot oil on me. Called me senile. Sabotaged me. Lied about me. Made me bleed. Tried to erase me. I was angry, she whispered. So was I replied. And instead of using violence, I used cameras. She looked down. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a check. This is the money I took out using your name, she said. And the jewelry I never pawned. I'm returning it all. I'm not fighting the lawsuit. I can't live with it anymore. I didn't take the check. But I took the jewelry box. And I looked her in the eyes and said, you won't be remembered for what you did. You'll be remembered for the day I stopped being silent. Then I turned and closed the door in her face. People always think the worst bruises are the ones you can see. The purple and blue ones, the burns and scratches. But I've learned different. The worst bruises live beneath the skin, inside the silences, the apologies you were too scared to demand, the years you spent second-guessing yourself. They hide in your voice when it trembles for no reason. In your hands when they flinch at loud noises. In your sleep when even dreams aren't safe anymore. After Serena's apology, and I use that word lightly, I didn't feel better. I felt numb. That kind of numbness that settles in your bones when a storm finally passes. Not relief. Not joy. Just the absence of chaos. And you begin to ask yourself, who was I before all this? What did I like before I was constantly surviving? I spent the next few days in silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence Serena used to enforce. This was different. This silence was space. Space to think, space to exist, space to look around my house, my home, and see what was still mine. I wandered from room to room like a stranger in a museum of my own life. The hallway still had the mark on the wall where Nathan crashed his tricycle as a toddler. The bathroom cabinet still held my lavender soap, now buried under Serena's age-correcting skincare. Her perfume still lingered faintly on the upstairs curtains. I washed them. Every single one. I stripped her presence out of every fabric, every drawer, every trace. But the memories? Those take longer. One morning, I opened the cupboard and found the ceramic mug Nathan made me in kindergarten. It had a lopsided handle and a painted heart on the front. I hadn't seen it in years. Serena must have shoved it to the back, behind the fancy china she insisted we display. I cradled that mug like it was a fragile baby bird. And I cried. Because for a moment, I remembered who I was before all of this. Before Harold died. Before Nathan drifted. Before Serena smiled her way into our lives like a fox in silk. I was a woman who drank coffee out of an ugly mug her son made. That was enough once. The legal proceedings went faster than expected. Serena didn't contest anything. Her lawyer arranged a quiet settlement. She would pay back every stolen dollar, plus damages, in monthly checks. She couldn't afford it, but her parents had stepped in. I suppose they preferred a financial blow to public disgrace. She also signed a restraining order. Not that I feared her anymore. But it felt good. Like drawing a line in ink. Nathan made sure everything was filed properly. He spoke little during the process, but I knew it haunted him. I caught him staring at the attic stairs once, the same way I used to, like the secrets up there could still scream. I walked up behind him. "You didn't fail me," I said softly. "I didn't protect you either," he replied. "You protected me when it mattered," I said. When it finally mattered. A few weeks later, Maureen visited again. She brought two things, a small envelope. And an idea. Inside the envelope was a letter from another woman, a woman who'd seen my story shared through the shelter I partnered with. She wrote about her own daughter-in-law. How the emotional abuse crept in like fog, invisible until it was choking her. She wrote that after seeing what I did, she installed a hidden mic in her bedroom and captured everything. "I'm filing for protective guardianship next week," the letter ended. I would have never believed I had the strength. Until I heard what you did with a knife, a camera, and your silence. I read that letter 3 times. Then Maureen said, "We're building something. A network. Quiet women, loud proof. Women who think no one will believe them until they have the evidence to force belief. Would you help us train them? Speak. Teach them how to document it safely." I didn't even hesitate. Yes. The first time I stood in front of a small group of women at the shelter, my hands shook. But I looked at them, really looked, and I saw myself. Not the Eleanor who flinched at slammed doors. Not the Eleanor who whispered apologies for bruises she didn't cause. Not the Eleanor who nearly died in silence. I saw the version who survived all of it. And I said the words no one had ever said to me in my worst moments. "You're not crazy. You're not alone. And this is not the end of your story." There's something strange about healing. It doesn't come the way you expect. It doesn't arrive with music and sunlight. It comes in whispers. In doing something small without flinching. in realizing that you no longer feel like a ghost in your own skin. For me, healing began in a kitchen. The same kitchen where a knife once flew past my face. The same kitchen where I used to feel hunted in my own home. And yet, there I stood one quiet Tuesday morning, humming to myself while slicing apples for pie. The new set of utensils lay on the counter, dull, soft-edged, almost cartoonish. Nothing dangerous. Nothing sharp. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because the weapon wasn't the knife. It was silence. And I had put that down. Word spread slowly, but steadily. After I spoke at the shelter a second time, more women started writing letters. Then emails. Then quiet calls in the middle of the night, sometimes from blocked numbers. Women in their 60s, 70s, even 80s. Women who had suffered in silence longer than I had. Women whose children believed their abusers. Women who'd been erased from their own homes. The stories broke me. But they also built me. Maureen and I started calling it the Second Voice Project. The name came from a woman named Lydia who once said, "My first voice was the one I used to beg him to stop. My second voice is the one that gets heard." We gave them tools, affordable cameras, safe hiding places, guides for building timelines, logging abuse, documenting without risk. And one by one, women came back to life. But while the project bloomed, I was still tending to a garden of my own. Nathan. He carried guilt like a shadow now. It followed him into every room. I'd find him standing in doorways sometimes, staring like he wanted to ask something, but didn't dare. One evening, over dinner, he finally spoke. "Why didn't you fight back?" he asked. Not accusing. Not blaming. Just broken. I put down my fork, looked him in the eye, and I told him the truth. Because fighting back too soon would have made me the monster. She'd already told you I was forgetful, clumsy, unstable. If I raised my voice, you would have seen her version of me. But cameras, proof, they don't need to scream. They whisper. And when the truth whispers long enough, people listen. He nodded. His eyes welled with tears. "I failed you, Mom." I reached across the table. Took his hand. "No. You believed me when it mattered. And you've been fighting ever since." He broke down. And that night, he finally let himself be mothered again. Weeks passed. And then came the trial. Not a criminal trial, though it could have been. We chose the civil route. Cleaner. Faster. Focused. The courtroom was quiet. Serena didn't speak. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not thinner, just hollow. Her voice, when she did speak, sounded rehearsed, like a woman trying to imitate regret. Her lawyer argued for mercy. She had suffered enough. The public humiliation had cost her dearly. She'd been under stress. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The recordings did all the speaking. The knife. The insults. The laugh when I cried. Her saying, "She's one fall away from the grave, I might just speed it up." When the judge handed down the verdict, full restitution, permanent restraining order, and court-mandated psychiatric counseling, Serena finally looked at me. And I realized something shocking. She was afraid of me now. Not because I was violent. Because I told the truth. Because I had witnesses. Because the silence she weaponized had become her sentence. And in that moment, the knife that once nearly killed me, it became a mirror. She was the one undone by its reflection. Back home, I walked through the kitchen again. Stared at the cabinet. That gash in the wood still there. But this time, I ran my fingers along it and smiled. Because now, it didn't hurt. It reminded. People kept asking me if I'd ever repair it. The cabinet, I mean. The one with the knife mark. Neighbors. Cousins. Even Nathan offered again. "We could sand it down," he said. "Or replace the whole door. You don't have to look at it forever." But that's the thing. I do want to look at it. Because it's not just a cabinet door anymore. It's a scar. And scars are not shameful. They're just proof that you've healed around the wound. Every time I pass that cabinet, I remember the woman I used to be, staring down at her trembling hands, whispering apologies for noises she didn't make, accidents she didn't cause, burns she didn't deserve. I remember the fear, the humiliation, the moment I stopped recognizing my own reflection. But I also remember what followed. The camera. The silence I weaponized. The footage I played. The truth that changed everything. That scar in the cabinet? It's my war medal. The house felt different now. Lighter. Warmer. But more than the air had changed, I had changed. I no longer shrank from noises. I no longer tiptoed around my own kitchen. I no longer hesitated before speaking in front of others, afraid I'd be labeled confused or emotional. Because I had been labeled before. And now I had reclaimed those labels. Confused? No. Emotional? Of course, emotions are strength. Clumsy? Only when dodging knives meant for my silence. That week, Nathan came home from work carrying a cardboard box. "What's that?" I asked. He grinned. A surprise. He pulled out a small white sign, hand-carved, wood-burned letters etched into it. It read, "The Scar Cabinet, where silence ended." I stared at it for a long time. Then laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. Deep belly laughter, the kind that makes your eyes sting. I took the sign and hung it right above that crooked gash in the wood. Now every guest who walks through the kitchen sees it. Some ask. Some smile knowingly. Some just pause and think. A week later, I hosted my own dinner. No holiday. No guests who made me feel like I was the problem. Just women from the Second Voice Project, some I'd only met through letters, others I'd coached through their first footage recordings, others still in the thick of their battles. They sat at my table, in my house, beside my scarred cabinet. We passed bread, poured wine, and shared the kind of stories that never make the news. One woman, Irene, 66, white hair, bruises just fading, stood up after dessert and said something I'll never forget. "When I left my son's house last month, I had nothing but a plastic bag and a cracked phone. I had no plan. No clue where I'd sleep. But I had a recording, his wife calling me a burden and locking me in the laundry room. That recording saved me. And I wouldn't have known how to do it if I hadn't heard about Eleanor's cabinet." My throat tightened. Because that wasn't a metaphor anymore. The cabinet had become something real. Symbolic. Shared. By the end of the night, we were all laughing gently, warily, like women who knew joy was precious because it had been stolen so often. As they left, one by one, Irene hugged me and whispered, "You know what you are, Eleanor? You're the sound the knife didn't make." It didn't hit me until later. The knife that missed me? It made no noise when it cut the air. Just wind. But it left behind a roar inside me. And now that roar was echoing in other women, too. The first time I was recognized in public, I was in aisle 4 of the local hardware store, buying a replacement filter for our furnace. An older woman, maybe late 50s, walked up to me, slow, cautious. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "Are you the woman from the video? The one with the knife, the daughter-in-law, the cabinet?" I froze. For a moment, the room tilted. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I knew what she was asking. She wasn't here for a story. She was here for permission. Permission to speak her own. I nodded slowly. Yes, that was me. Her eyes welled up instantly. She reached out not to shake my hand, but to hold it. Like I was something sacred. Something real. "My daughter-in-law calls me dead weight," she said. "Told my son I should go into a home. I haven't told anyone that, not even my bridge group. But then I saw you. And I thought maybe I wasn't crazy." "You're not," I said. "You're not even close." She smiled through her tears. "Thank you for surviving loud enough for the rest of us." That line stuck with me all day. Surviving loud enough. The video from Thanksgiving had gone further than I ever intended. At first, it was just shared among shelters and survivor networks, training material for what quiet domestic abuse can look like in older women. Then someone posted it on a forum for elder abuse awareness. Then a journalist contacted Nathan for a local piece. Then another outlet picked it up. Soon, I was a headline. Elderly woman secretly films abuse, outs her daughter-in-law during family dinner. The cabinet that broke the silence. When Grandma fights back, a Thanksgiving no one will forget. I didn't love the sensationalism, but I did love the result. Because for the first time, older women were seeing themselves not as helpless, but as heroes. Not footnotes in someone else's crisis, but central characters in their own redemption stories. And more than anything, they were seeing each other. The shelter started getting more calls than they could handle. Maureen forwarded dozens of them to me, women who didn't want cops yet, didn't want court, didn't even want to report anything. They just wanted to talk to the woman with the cabinet. So I did. I set aside 2 hours each day to speak to them. Some told stories darker than mine. Some cried after 2 sentences and hung up. Others just breathed on the line for a few minutes before saying thank you and hanging up quietly. One woman called from a hospital. Her daughter-in-law had accidentally closed the car door on her hand. 3 bones broken. No police report. She told the nurse, "I'm losing balance in my old age," she whispered. And I believed her. Until I saw your clip. I didn't give her advice. I gave her a plan. Where to hide a recording device. What signs to track. How to build a private digital folder of evidence and mail it to someone she trusted. Not all battles are won with fists, I told her. Sometimes they're won with receipts. But not everyone liked my voice growing louder. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a simple envelope, sealed roughly, like someone had pressed too hard in anger. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, "You've made a fool of your family. You should be ashamed. No one needs a bitter old woman poisoning the younger generation. If you were a decent mother, your daughter-in-law wouldn't have hated you so much." No signature. Of course not. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it neatly, walked to the backyard, lit a match, and burned it over the rose garden. Let them send their shame. I had nothing left to be ashamed of. Later that night, Nathan came to my room. He had seen the story reposted again, this time on a major news site. He looked proud, but cautious. "You okay with this, Mom?" he asked. I mean, the attention. The exposure. People knowing all of it. I looked up at him. The boy I raised. The man who failed me and found his way back. "I'd rather be known for my scars than buried with my silence," I said. He hugged me. We didn't say anything more. That weekend, another woman showed up at my door. This time, it wasn't a neighbor or a friend. It was a stranger. Her name was Lizette. 74. Cane in hand. Trembling slightly. She said, "I got on a bus 2 towns over. My daughter-in-law monitors my calls, but she doesn't know about your story yet. I saw you on someone's tablet at the grocery store. I need help." I welcomed her in. Because I remembered what it felt like to be trapped in a place that looked like home but felt like a cage. And I knew what it felt like when someone, anyone, finally opened the door. Lizette sat at my kitchen table like she was afraid the chair might vanish underneath her. She held her purse tight in her lap, one trembling hand wrapped protectively around the handle. Her eyes kept flicking to the door, as if expecting someone to burst in and drag her back. I poured tea. The good kind, the kind I used to save for guests back when I still had a voice no one listened to. Today, I served it to her like medicine. I told her the oven was leaking gas, Lizette whispered. So she let me out for half an hour. Just enough time to get to the bus. My stomach twisted. "You told her there was a gas leak, so you could leave the house?" I asked gently. She nodded, tears forming. "I haven't had my own key in 2 years," she said. "I'm not allowed to go out without her or my son. They say it's for my safety, that I'll get confused or fall. But I know what it is. It's control." Yes, it was. She didn't need to say more. I already saw it in her posture. In her eyes. In the bruises beneath her words. I didn't ask what her daughter-in-law had done. Not yet. I just let her talk. And she did. For 3 hours. She told me about meals being withheld. About medication, mishaps. About being locked in a sunroom with no fan during the hottest days of July. About the day she finally said, "I think I'd rather be homeless than invisible." It was that line that broke me. Because I had once felt the same. The scariest thing isn't violence. It's erasure. The slow, intentional unraveling of your identity until even you begin to question if you deserve to exist. That night, I made up the guest room. Lizette cried when she saw the bed. Not because it was fancy, it wasn't, but because it had fresh sheets. A reading lamp. A door she could close and lock. That simple act of privacy was revolutionary. "This doesn't have to be permanent," I said. "But it is safe." She nodded. Safe sounds like heaven. In the morning, I found her standing in front of the scar cabinet. She traced the line with her finger. This is where she threw the knife? I nodded. And you left it? I did. She turned to me and said something I hadn't expected. Then maybe I'll leave mine too. She pulled up her sleeve and showed me a small, crescent-shaped scar near her elbow. My daughter-in-law says I fell, she whispered. But I remember. It was a saucepan. Thrown hard. I hit the corner of the counter. I covered it with a cardigan the next day so the neighbors wouldn't ask. I didn't speak. Just walked to the drawer and handed her a camera. We built a plan. Lizette would return home after 2 days, enough time to prepare, to record, to rebuild a digital lifeline. We set up cloud storage. Backups. Safe words. She would call me every Sunday with a secret phrase. If she said, "The hydrangeas bloomed early," I'd know something was wrong. Maureen came by. She interviewed Lizette. Took her affidavit. Marked her as an open file. Quiet legal protection, just in case. We gave Lizette her second voice. And when she left, she wasn't trembling anymore. She was holding herself upright, like a woman who remembered that her body still belonged to her. After she was gone, I sat alone for a while. The house was quiet again. But not the old kind of quiet. This was a peaceful quiet. A steady, strong kind. Like the silence after a storm that didn't win. I walked past the cabinet again. I looked at that scar. And I whispered, "Thank you." 2 weeks later, Lizette called. "The hydrangeas bloomed early," she said. My blood ran cold. But she didn't sound scared. She laughed. "I mean it," she said, voice dancing. "They bloomed early." My neighbor brought me cuttings. My daughter-in-law saw her talking to me and flew into a rage. I had the recorder in my apron. I got everything. I didn't say a word. Just smiled into the phone like someone who'd watched a match spark inside a soaked forest. Another woman had found her fire. When I was younger, I thought power meant speaking the loudest. Winning arguments. Being in control. But now I know true power is something much quieter. It's the moment someone knocks at your door, not for charity, not for help, but because they believe you understand. Because your scars look like theirs. And in that way, Lizette wasn't the first flame. She was the first torch I handed off. And it didn't stop with her. The next to arrive was a woman named Teresa. She came by bus from 3 towns away. Someone at the shelter told her I was the woman with the cabinet. She carried nothing but a duffel bag and a photo album duct-taped shut. Teresa had been caring for her grandson for 6 years after her daughter died. When her son-in-law remarried, his new wife began calling Teresa a squatter. Took over the home. Slowly pushed her into the basement room for space. Then one day, changed the locks and told her, "The boy doesn't need to grow up around your kind of sadness." She'd slept in a laundromat that night. I welcomed her in. She left 3 weeks later with a signed custody request, legal guidance from Maureen, and 3 months of audio recordings documenting how she was spoken to like a maid, like a ghost, like a weed in a young family's garden. 3 weeks after that, she had her grandson back. Then came Donna. Then Margaret. Then Beatrice. Each woman carried a different story. Some had bruises. Some just had questions. Others had nothing left but the memory of who they used to be before someone made them feel like a burden. And one by one, I gave them what Serena never let me have: a locked door, a warm meal, a listening ear, a flashlight in the dark. Nathan wasn't surprised when I converted the upstairs den into a second guest room. He walked in one day to find me stripping wallpaper. I looked over my shoulder and said, "If the pain made a home out of this house, so can the healing." He smiled. "So this is what you're now, huh? A halfway house for fire starters." "No," I said. "For fire survivors." By spring, we had 17 women in the network. 9 had won legal freedom. 3 had reconciled with their families after exposure. 2 had pressed criminal charges and won. And a handful were still gathering courage, but no longer doing it alone. I remember one woman, Aruna, who wrote me a letter from across the state. She didn't have money, didn't have a car, but she had a kitchen and a knife-shaped scar on her thigh from years ago. She wrote, "I stood in front of my cabinet last night, the one I used to hide behind when the shouting started. And I carved a line in it. Not out of hate, but to remember that I heard you. Your cabinet had a scar. Now mine does too. That letter made me cry harder than I had in months. Because it hit me, the pain that nearly destroyed me had become the blueprint for a movement. One day, Maureen arrived with a thick folder in her hands. She placed it on my table and said, "You're not going to like this, but I think it's time." I opened it. Inside were forms, signatures, contacts. The legal paperwork to register our little underground network as an official nonprofit. The name was already printed across the top, the Scar Cabinet Foundation. I looked at her, stunned. "I didn't do all this," I whispered. "No," she said. "You just lit the match. We built the fire together." That night, I sat by the fireplace, my cane resting beside me, the sound of new guests whispering upstairs. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt something I hadn't dared to believe was real. Purpose. Not borrowed. Not inherited. Not asked for. Earned. Scar by scar. Truth by truth. Voice by voice. It was a rainy Monday morning when the van arrived. White, no markings on the side, but the antenna rising from the roof told me everything. Nathan peeked through the curtains. "Channel 8, he said, squinting. "Local. They sent a producer." I didn't move. I stood at the kitchen counter, one hand resting on the old teapot, the other clenched tight on my cane. "They'll want footage," I muttered. "Quotes. A headline. Something raw." Nathan nodded. "Do you want them here?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of Lizette, Teresa, Margaret, Aruna. The guest room upstairs, occupied again by a woman with fresh scars and a fake smile. I thought of Serena and how her story was never supposed to be mine. And how, somehow, I made it mine anyway. Then I exhaled. "Let them in," I said. "But they're not coming for a headline. They're coming for the truth." The reporter's name was Eliza. Young. Nervous. She walked into my home like it was a church. "This is the house," she whispered, glancing at the walls. "The one in the footage?" "The cabinet." I nodded. Let her in like a tour guide of trauma. I didn't bother dusting that morning. I didn't rehearse answers. I didn't hide the cracks in the floor or the handwritten instructions taped near the stove for the guests who needed reminders. I let her see it all. The women, some of them, introduced themselves. Others stayed upstairs. No one was forced to speak. But when we reached the kitchen, they all followed, one by one. And Eliza saw what I had grown used to, a room full of survivors pretending to be ordinary. And failing, because we were anything but. She pointed to the scar in the cabinet. "May I?" I nodded. She ran her fingers along it the same way Lizette once had. "This is where it started?" "No," I said. "This is where it ended." She turned on her camera. And I told her everything. Not the headlines. Not the dramatic trailer version. I told her about the slow theft of identity. The forgotten birthdays. The meals thrown in the trash just to remind me who controlled the table. I told her about how silence eats you in pieces. How when no one believes you, you begin to not believe yourself. And then I told her about the knife. The camera. The footage. The look on Serena's face when her performance collapsed in front of a full audience of family. And finally, I told her what happened next. The abuse didn't stop when she left, I said. It never does. It echoes. It lingers. It hides in your sleep. But then, women started knocking. And I realized something. That scar in the cabinet wasn't just mine. It was ours. Eliza was crying behind the camera. So was one of the guests. So was I. The story aired 2 nights later. It wasn't perfect. But it was honest. The Scar Cabinet, how one elderly woman sparked a silent revolution. The footage was tastefully edited. Voices disguised where requested. Names left out where needed. But the truth rang through every word. And when the episode ended, my phone lit up. 37 missed calls in 2 hours. By morning, the Scar Cabinet inbox had over 100 emails. They were coming. Not just the broken. Not just the brave. But the unheard. That night, I stood in the kitchen alone. I lit a candle near the scarred cabinet. Not in mourning. Not in memory. In honor. Honor of every woman who'd bled in silence. Honor of every story that was rewritten, not erased. And as the wind howled outside and the windows trembled, I whispered something I never thought I'd say inside these walls. Thank you, Serena, for throwing that knife. Because it missed. And in missing, it made room for a fire no one could put out. I woke up that morning to find 6 envelopes slipped under my front door. 6. No stamps. No postmarks. Just quiet offerings left in the night, as if the senders were afraid that if they waited until morning, they'd lose the courage to share their truth. I sat with them in silence. One by one, I opened them. My old hands trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of what was about to be let loose into the world. The first was from a woman named Eleanor, too. Aged 81. Still living in the house where her son's wife once pushed her down the cellar stairs. He told the neighbors I tripped on a rug. But I don't even own a rug down there. That was 7 years ago. My hip healed. My trust didn't. The second was a drawing. Crude, shaky lines in red crayon. A child's depiction of a grandma sitting in a chair, her mouth drawn as a single line, while behind her stood a woman with fire in her eyes. No words. Just a note attached. This is how my son sees his grandmother now. After watching your story. Thank you. The third letter was folded in half a dozen times. Tiny handwriting. Foreign stamps. Maureen would later confirm it came from as far as Belgium. In my culture, we are taught to bow to the younger generation. To hand down everything. But I handed down my home, my silence, and my pride and received bruises in return. Until I saw the woman with the cabinet. I sat there reading each one like scripture. Every sentence a hymn. Every tear a prayer. And by the time I opened the 6th letter, I was already crying. But this one was different. This one had a name I knew. Serena. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Still too neat. Still trying to impress someone. The letter read, Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to be writing this. But watching what you've built, what you've become. It's the first time I've looked at you and seen more than what I was afraid of. You are a better mother than I ever allowed myself to believe. And a stronger woman than I ever dared to become. I'm trying to change. I know you don't need to hear that. But I needed to say it. Asterisk, there was no signature. Just a final line. You survived the storm. I was the storm. I'm sorry. I folded the letter, placed it in the bottom drawer of the cabinet, the scar cabinet, and closed it. Not because I forgave her. Not yet. But because part of my healing meant acknowledging the ripple, even if it came from someone who once tried to drown me. That afternoon, I laid the letters on the kitchen table. Lizette came down the stairs. Then Teresa. Then Aruna. Then a new girl, just 61, but with eyes that had lived 3 lifetimes. One by one, they sat with me. One by one, they read the stories. None of us spoke for a long time. Because sometimes silence isn't fear. Sometimes silence is respect. And in that moment, it was sacred. Later that night, I tucked the letters into a wooden box Nathan had made me years ago. The one I once used to store receipts and old recipes. Now it held proof. Proof that survival echoes. That wounds speak even when healed. That one woman's scar, left unpainted, unpolished, unapologetic, can make thousands feel seen. It started with whispers. Then came the calls. Then came the letters. But by spring, it became something else entirely. I got an email from a woman named Dr. Clarice Hahn, a professor of social psychology at a university upstate. She wanted me to speak. Not at a shelter. Not in someone's living room. Not behind closed doors. At a conference. A national one. The kind of event where people wore name tags and suits. Where they used words like framework, empathy metrics, and post-traumatic growth. Where I was expected to stand behind a podium and tell the story of the scar cabinet to hundreds. I stared at the invitation for 2 whole days. Me? A speaker? In front of strangers who had degrees and initials after their names? Nathan nudged me gently. Mom, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. I'm not trying to prove anything, I whispered. I just don't want the story to shrink back into silence. So I went. Lizette helped pick my outfit. A soft navy cardigan. Silver brooch shaped like a flame. Teresa did my hair. Nathan drove me. I remember standing in the wings, behind the curtain. I could hear the host introducing me. Eleanor Meredith is not a therapist. She is not a lawyer. She is not a politician. But she is something all of us should be afraid to ignore, a woman who refused to stay quiet. The applause was polite at first. Then the lights came up. And I walked out. At first, I told them what they expected. The abuse. The knife. The footage. The Thanksgiving that changed everything. But then I paused. And I said the part one hadn't planned to. The truth is, I wasn't always just a victim, I said. For a long time, I was also an enabler. Not by choice, but by silence. I let people convince me I was frail, forgetful, over-emotional. I swallowed their lies because I didn't want to be difficult. The room was dead quiet. I wore those insults like they were my fault. And once I believed them, it gave them permission. I looked up, straight into the cameras, into the eyes of women I'd never met. But I am not difficult. I am not broken. I am not just a grandmother, or a guest in my own home, or a burden to be managed. I am Eleanor. I own a scarred cabinet, a stolen history, and a fire I will never let go cold again. And for the first time since this all began, they stood. Not just clapped. Stood. Afterward, dozens came to shake my hand. One woman pulled me aside and whispered, "I haven't spoken to my mother in 6 years. After today, I think I'm going to knock on her door." Another asked, "Can we replicate the Scar Cabinet project in our city?" I said yes. Just find one woman brave enough to tell her truth and give her the tools to protect it. That night in the hotel room, I lay awake. Not anxious. Not haunted. Just awake. Because the weight on my chest for all those years? It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was purpose. And now that I had named it, now that others had too, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was tired, but because for the first time in decades, I was fully alive. It started with a phone call from Maureen. "Are you sitting down?" she asked. "I've lived through knives, bruises, and courtrooms," I said. "You think I scare that easy now?" She laughed. Then her voice softened. "Eleanor, there's a bill. And it's got your name on it." I blinked. A bill? Yes. A proposal for elder abuse protection and mandatory hidden camera admissibility for caregivers over 65. The working name is the Meredith Clause. I couldn't speak. Not for a full 10 seconds. Because in all my years, I had signed holiday cards, medical forms, checks, and once, a restraining order. But now, my name was being written into law. Not as a victim, but as a precedent. Within a week, it was everywhere. Local news. Then regional. Then a segment on national TV. They showed the cabinet scar again, blurry but powerful. They aired parts of my conference speech. They even played a montage of women who credited the woman with the cabinet for helping them leave, report, record, survive. One woman in Illinois was caught on hidden chem being fed sedatives by her son's wife. She credited our toolkit for saving her life. Another in Oregon had installed a fake mirror, recorded verbal abuse, financial theft, and a near-attempted overdose. Her lawyer cited the Meredith Clause in the petition for emergency guardianship. It hadn't even passed yet. But it was already saving people. Already working. Nathan came over one night with a small box. "No occasion," he said. Just felt right. Inside was a brass plaque. It read, "The Scar Cabinet this kitchen saved lives." I laughed and cried at the same time. We hung it above the cabinet. Right over the scar. Now no one could walk in this house without knowing what it stood for. The next letter I got wasn't from a woman. It was from a man. A father. Widowed. 70. His daughter-in-law had convinced his son to sign him into a retirement facility, then sold his house. She told neighbors he had dementia, though he'd never been diagnosed. He saw my story from a shared TV in the facility lobby. He wrote, "When I told the nurse I wanted to go home, she said, 'But you have no home.' I do now. It's not made of bricks. It's made of courage. And it started with your cabinet." I read that letter 5 times. Because it reminded me that what we were doing wasn't just for women. It was for anyone left behind. 2 months later, I was invited to testify. A formal hearing. State Capitol. Nathan went with me. So did Maureen. So did two of the women who'd once hidden in my guest room, now proud, standing tall, with their own scars and new addresses. I stood at the microphone and told them, I don't want your pity. I want your protection. Not for me. For every woman who's still sitting in a silent kitchen, pretending her bruises are clumsiness and her hunger is forgetfulness. Let her record. Let her prove. Let her survive with evidence. Give her what no one gave me when I needed it, belief. You could hear a pin drop. Then one senator started clapping. Then another. And then, the whole room. The Meredith Clause passed committee unanimously. And I went home not like a woman who had spoken at a hearing. I went home like a woman who had just rewritten history. The news called it a victory. The papers called it historic. The women called it hope. And for a moment, I let myself believe the war was over. That maybe, just maybe, the worst parts of the story had ended with applause in a courtroom and a brass plaque on my cabinet. But stories like mine, they don't end quietly. Especially when silence is what once gave the enemy power. It started with a voicemail. Blocked number. No caller ID. But the voice? It was unmistakable. Not Serena. Someone else. A man. Thought you'd enjoy being famous. Thought you'd like knowing you destroyed a family. You really think you're helping people? You're just teaching them to lie better. You started something. You won't be able to stop it. Click. That was all. But it was enough. Enough to curdle my tea in my stomach. Enough to bring that old tremble back into my fingertips. I showed it to Nathan. He listened once. Then again. He sat quietly, jaw clenched. Do you think it's someone she knows? He asked. I don't know, I whispered. But it's someone who knows me. Someone who doesn't like what we're building. Nathan wanted to take it to the police. I said no. Not yet. Because fear is a trap I already lived inside once, and I wasn't going to build new walls around my own progress. But I made changes. Small ones. New locks. Security cameras installed outside, not just hidden inside. A new phone number for our hotline. And a password system with the women in our home. If something didn't sound right, they'd know. Still, it shook me. I started watching shadows again. Listening too hard to footsteps on the sidewalk. Questioning parked cars that stayed too long across the street. I hated it. Not the fear, but the familiarity of it. Because I had lived this before. And the taste of it came back too easy. Then, it escalated. Someone spray-painted the word liar on our mailbox. Bright red. Sloppy. Nathan called it in. The officer took a photo, filed a report, and said, probably just kids. But we both knew better. This wasn't random. It was personal. For the first time in months, I hesitated to speak publicly. Declined one interview. Then another. Then a podcast reached out and said they'd love to feature me, but received anonymous messages claiming I'd faked the whole thing. I didn't back down. But I did feel the weight again. The same weight I carried when Serena used to smile sweetly in front of guests and shove my plate into the trash the moment they left. The same weight of knowing the world only believes you until someone lies louder. Then came the envelope. No stamp. Left on the porch. Inside, a printed photo. A still image of my kitchen. Taken from outside. Through the window. At night, my heart stopped. I wasn't alone when that was taken. I could see Lizette's outline. My own shoulders. My home. And that was the moment I broke. I called Maureen. She came instantly. She didn't ask why I was shaking. She just took the photo and said, they picked the wrong damn house. Then she looked at me and added something I hadn't expected. You wanted a revolution, Eleanor. This is what it feels like when the old world starts to burn. Later that night, I gathered the women in the kitchen. We stood around the scar cabinet. No tea. No snacks. Just stillness. I held up the photo. This is not just a threat, I said. This is proof that what we're doing matters. That someone is scared of what we've built. Teresa spoke first. Then we don't stop. Lizette nodded. We just get louder. Even the new girl, quiet, skittish, barely 30 days out of her hell, said softly, let them watch. We're not hiding. And I realized then, they weren't following me anymore. They were following each other. There's a special kind of fear that creeps in when you don't know your enemy. When bruises have names, you know who to avoid. When knives have fingerprints, you know who threw them. But this? A voicemail. Spray paint. A photo taken in the dark. This was different. This was ghost warfare. And yet, I'd survived worse. I'd survived Serena. I'd survived a home where kindness was rationed and silence was demanded. I'd survived a world where no one asked me how I was unless I looked like I might die. So no, this wasn't going to break me. It was just going to sharpen me. Maureen called in favors. 2, to be exact. 1, a retired detective who'd once worked domestic abuse cases. The second, a digital forensics expert. Together, they reviewed the threats. The voicemail had no metadata. Burner phone. The photo was old, maybe a week or more, taken with a low-end device. But the angle of the photo? That told us something. It was taken from inside a car, the expert said. See this? That glare? Windshield reflection. They were parked across the street. Nathan checked the neighborhood camera network. Nothing conclusive. But we now had a time window. And that meant something. We were chasing a ghost, but not a smart one. Meanwhile, something strange started happening. The more the threats came, the more the women rallied. The house became tighter, braver. They stayed up late together now, cooking, laughing, plotting small rebellions against the lives they left behind. Lizette made threat cake every Friday, a dark chocolate loaf with powdered sugar words scrawled on top. Try me. Teresa began teaching the others how to use burner phones legally. Aruna drafted her own will, one that disinherited anyone who ever raised a hand to her again. And the newest guest? Mira. 68. Soft voice, steel eyes. She began something dangerous. I think it's someone we know, she said one night. She had a theory. And she'd written it out complete with photos and names and timelines. Whoever's behind this, she whispered, they're trying to intimidate you before the Meredith Clause goes federal. Because yes, it was moving up. A senator from another state wanted to introduce it on the national level. And someone clearly wanted it killed. Not debated. Buried. Mira handed me a manila folder. Inside were printouts of message boards. Anonymous users. But one in particular had been tracking my speeches, the SCAR Cabinet Network, and our shelter partnerships. Leaving poison comments. Calling us a cult of bitter widows teaching lies. The username? Air to Order 1982, and the posts traced back to a single city. The same one Serena lived in. Nathan went pale when I told him. You think? I don't know, I said. But someone is working very hard to make sure the world sees us as liars. Maureen made calls. The senator's team increased their security detail. And I didn't hide. I hosted a dinner. It wasn't just for the women in my home. It was for survivors. Advocates. Journalists. Legislators. 27 people sat around my table. And before we ate, I stood up and said this. Someone out there wants us afraid. Someone out there wants us to shrink. But shrinking is how we got here. So tonight we speak. Loudly. Clearly. And without apology. Then I raised my glass. To the ghost who watches from the shadows. We see you too. And we're not going anywhere. Later that night, I went to the cabinet. I opened the drawer that held Serena's letter. And I added a second one. This one? Unsigned. Typed. Short. You tried to scare me with silence. But I have women who echo. And we get louder every day. It was a Thursday morning when the ghost finally showed its face. I was watering the hydrangeas, the ones Lizette said would always be our silent alarm, when a car pulled up across the street. Not fast. Not secretive. Just deliberate. Dark blue. Tinted windows. A license plate that meant nothing to me. But the driver? I recognized him the moment he stepped out. Lucas. Serena's brother. The same man who once said to me at our wedding dinner, she's a firecracker, that one, you better not smother her. He was leaner now. Angrier. The kind of man who wore arrogance like aftershave. And I knew, before he opened his mouth, exactly why he'd come. I didn't flinch. I set down the watering can, wiped my hands, and walked right up to the fence. I've been wondering when you'd come crawling out of your hole, I said. He sneered. Funny. I thought you'd be too busy playing Mother Teresa for broken women. I raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be an insult? I came to warn you, he said, voice low, teeth bared. You keep talking, keep stirring the pot, and you're going to ruin lives. Serena lost her job because of your video. And my name's been dragged through your little movement, even though I never laid a hand on you. I laughed once, short and sharp. You never needed to, Lucas. You did it all with your mouth. His hands clenched. But he didn't move. He wasn't stupid. Just used to being feared. He leaned closer. You think you're building something noble here, but all you're doing is teaching women to turn on their families. You're the reason marriages are breaking. You're the reason good men are afraid to speak. Oh, honey, I said. If they're afraid of women speaking, they were never good men. He stepped back. I could see it in his eyes the moment he realized I wasn't the old Eleanor. Not the one who folded laundry in silence. Not the one who smiled through pain. Not the one who ever mistook fear for love again. I didn't call the police. But I did make a phone call. To Maureen. Visitor, she asked. Unwelcome, I said. But valuable. Want me to press something? Not yet. Let's see how he likes being watched. We installed 2 more cameras that afternoon. Motion alerts. Cloud backups. A system Nathan coded himself that pinged my phone if any of them came near again. Because Lucas hadn't come alone. He represented something bigger. A wave of people terrified that women like me had learned to write our own stories, loudly, clearly, and with timestamps. That night, I sat the women down. I didn't tell them about Lucas by name. I just told them the truth. There are people out there who will call us liars no matter how many bones we've broken or meals we've missed. They're not angry because we lied. They're angry because we stopped lying for them. And they understood. Each of them. Without a word. Because once you've survived long enough, you don't need a scar to know when a war's begun again. And then, something unexpected happened. 3 days after Lucas's visit, a letter arrived. Typed. Clean. Signed. From Serena. He was not sent by me. I want no part in threats or games. I may never earn your forgiveness. But I refuse to let the man who once mocked you at every family dinner now pretend he speaks for me. There was something else inside the envelope. A check. $10,000. A donation to the Scar Cabinet Foundation. The line memo read, for the locks you once couldn't afford. I sat with that check in my hand for a long time. Was it guilt? A bribe? A sliver of redemption? I didn't know. But I cashed it anyway. Because I knew exactly what to do with it. The very next day, we launched Project ScarCam, a micro-grant initiative to help elderly women install hidden cameras in abusive homes. We funded 15 systems in the first week. 4 already recorded evidence. 2 led to emergency removals. And one caught a daughter-in-law standing over a bed with a pillow in her hands. Lucas didn't come back. He didn't need to. Because now, he wasn't haunting me. He was fueling me. And in trying to shut me up, he made my voice a battle cry. They booked the auditorium months in advance. A televised panel. Elder care. Legal reform. Survivor testimony. They'd invited politicians, scholars, lawyers, and, quietly, me. At first, I thought I'd just sit in the back. Smile. Clap. Maybe stand for a minute and wave. But 2 days before the event, Maureen called and said, Eleanor, they want you to close the event. Final words. Live. I said nothing. She waited. Unless you're scared, she added gently. I closed my eyes and pictured Serena's knife. The scar in the cabinet. The photo on my porch. Lucas's face. The check in my hand. The women who lived, laughed, and healed in my home. I'm not scared, I said. I'm ready. The day arrived like a storm. Rain poured sideways on the glass windows of the venue. Flashbulbs lit up the entrance as I stepped out of Nathan's car. Lizette walked beside me. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. We were both survivors. Both symbols now, whether we liked it or not. Inside, the lights were harsh. The cameras sharper. The first speakers spoke about statistics. Numbers. Policies. How abuse against elderly women had risen in the past decade. How most cases went unreported. How the Meredith Clause was beginning to change things. Then a senator spoke about the future. Then a lawyer. Then a social worker. All important. All intelligent. All correct. But none of them had a scar on their kitchen cabinet. When they finally called my name, I walked on stage alone. No notes. No podium. Just a mic and 1,000 eyes. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I spoke. They told me I was lucky to have a roof over my head. That old women like me should be grateful to be kept. That if I stayed quiet, I'd stay safe. But what they really meant was, if you disappear, we'll be more comfortable. I stayed silent until silence nearly killed me. I stayed because I was tired. Tired of being doubted. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of being treated like wallpaper in a house I helped build. I paused. You could have heard a pin drop. The Meredith clause isn't about revenge. It's about proof. Because every woman I know has been told, at least once, that she was too emotional. That her bruises were accidents. That her tears were confusion. We are not confused. We are not fragile. We are not forgettable. I looked into the cameras. I thought about the ghost behind the threats. And then I said the one line that would travel across 1,000 headlines the next morning. You wanted us invisible. You taught us to be quiet. But now, we record. The room exploded into applause. Not polite. Not political. Personal. A wave of clapping, tears, shouts, and standing women, some older, some young, all lit from within. And I knew this wasn't just my voice anymore. This was ours. Afterward, someone pulled me aside. A man in a blazer. Staff member, I think. Mrs. Meredith, he said softly. There's a woman outside. She asked to see you. She didn't want to come in. But she's been standing under the rain since the speech began. I frowned. I walked out. And standing there, soaked to the bone, trembling but unbroken, was Serena. Her hair clung to her face. Her hands were empty. No check. No apology. Just raw eyes and a cracked voice. I didn't think you'd come out, she said. I looked at her. Then, gently, but you waited. I didn't come for forgiveness, she said. I came because I finally believe you. I stood still. And then, in the cold, wet silence, I whispered the truth. I stopped waiting for that a long time ago. But if you want to do better, then go help the next woman still trapped where I was. And I turned. Not out of hate, but because I didn't need her approval anymore. I had an audience now. A movement. A legacy. And a truth no one could threaten ever again. Before we begin, if my story has moved you, even one word of it, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Not for me, but for every woman still hiding in a silent kitchen, afraid no one will believe her. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone suffer in silence? Had you ever stayed quiet when you should have spoken? Let's break that silence together. Now, let me tell you how it ends. The cabinet still stands. Scar and all. By now, we could have replaced it. Refinished the wood. Polished the crack out of sight. But I never did. Because it's not just furniture anymore. It's a grave for the silence that used to live in me. 6 months after the panel, something happened I never expected. I was nominated for an International Humanitarian Award. Not for charity. Not for money. Not even for the law we passed. But for courage. That's what they said in the letter. For bravery in the face of systematic cruelty. For weaponizing truth when no one else would. For being the woman with the cabinet. I stared at that envelope until my hands stopped shaking. I didn't go to the award ceremony. I stayed home that night, sat in the kitchen with Lizette, Teresa, and the newest guest, a woman named Etta, who had come to us after her son locked her bedroom from the outside for safety. We made tea, told stories, burned old photographs. And as the snow fell against the windows, I looked around and realized this was my award. Not the plaque. Not the title. This. Women laughing again. Women sleeping through the night. Women remembering how to take up space. One day, a girl came by. 17. Skinny as a shadow. Bright eyes. Nervous voice. She said her grandmother used to live here. I didn't ask who. She just said, my mom always told me my grandma was crazy, but I found her letters. I think she was just scared. I let her in. She sat by the cabinet for almost an hour, running her fingers over the scar. She didn't say much. But before she left, she looked at me and whispered, "I think she would have loved what you turned her pain into." And then she left a daisy on the windowsill. I still haven't moved it. The world kept changing. The Meredith Clause was introduced in 5 more countries. 3 states adopted hidden camera allowances for elder abuse cases. Our Scar Cabinet network reached over 3,000 women. But I didn't become a symbol. I stayed at home. Because sometimes, justice doesn't need a courtroom. Sometimes it needs a casserole, a flashlight, a place to weep without being told you're overreacting. I never saw Serena again. Not in person. But every now and then, I'd hear a story about a woman's shelter getting a quiet donation, or a nurse advocating harder after seeing a video, or a former abuser helping fund therapy for a survivor. And I'd wonder, did the knife she threw finally miss her too? So now I sit here one last time, looking at the cabinet, telling this story, not for attention, not for revenge, but because somewhere, someone's standing in a kitchen just like mine. And she needs to hear this. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are not a guest in your own damn life. You are Eleanor now. You are fire. You are proof. And if they try to silence you again, let the scar do the talking.